Hi, my name is Jessica Snyder, and I put together a lesson on graphing and interpreting data for Dr. Levy's Intro to Teaching Students with Disabilities class, Section 6. This lesson is intended for students grades 3 to 4 and incorporates many accommodations and adaptation options, so it would work really well for an inclusive classroom or even a special ed classroom.
Graphing and Interpreting Data, a lesson by Jessica Snyder for SEDN 602, Section 6. I'm calling this lesson Bar Graphs for my class, and this lesson teaches students how to read and interpret data from a bar graph, as well as how to collect their own data and make a bar graph on a topic of their choice. Before starting the lesson, I will be sure to have one large sample bar graph to be hung or displayed for the class to see, reference sheets that include a smaller version of that bar graph, and as well as vocabulary term definitions for reference throughout the activity, a blank bar graph template for each student, blank data collection charts for each student to keep them organized, as well as crayons or colored pencils for the making of the bar graph. Step 1, Introduction. I will display a sample bar graph on the board for all to see. So that's something that might look like this. Students will take time to observe and take note of what they see. I will then open a discussion about the bar graph shown. So vocabulary words will be introduced by the questions that I ask. So for example, what data makes up this bar graph? The expected answer would be class's favorite sports. How can this data be interpreted? So I'm basically asking there, what can you find out from this graph? And the students can say that most of the kids like soccer, 4 students like softball, answers like that. And lastly, what categories is the data separated into? And there I would be looking for an answer such as soccer, softball, basketball, or other. After going over the sample bar graph, each student will be given a reference sheet with a smaller version of the sample bar graph and vocabulary words defined. So this is an example of the reference sheet that will be given to each student. It has a smaller version of that bar graph, as well as the definition of key vocab words to be referred to throughout the activity. Accommodation and adaptation options for the introduction part of this lesson. The sample bar graph will be large in size as well as have large print for students with visual impairments. Students with visual impairments could also be positioned close in proximity to the bar graph for convenient viewing. Students with assistive technology, such as an iPad, could be given a picture or a copy of the sample bar graph that can be viewed right on their screen. So that way it's right in their hands rather than having to look back and forth between the front of the room and their own desk. Students with cognitive disabilities can be paired with peers during observation time in order to learn from the observation of others. This open discussion of what students see in the bar graph displayed will allow for students to learn from each other as well as for the teacher, myself, to determine where the students are at in understanding. So this will give me the opportunity to kind of gauge where they are and how much more discussion needs to be had in order to ensure full understanding of the topic. Step 2, brainstorming. So at this point, I will tell the students that they will be making bar graphs of their own. As a class, ideas for potential bar graph topics can be shared. So I will be up at the front of the classroom writing down the appropriate ideas mentioned in order to create a sufficient list for everyone to see. So for example, students might suggest students' pets, favorite colors, favorite ice cream flavor, or number of siblings as bar graph topics, and I will write them on the board for everybody to see.
This brainstorming part of the lesson will allow students to bounce ideas off each other as well as build upon ideas that have already been mentioned. So hopefully by the end of the brainstorming, each student will be confident enough to raise their hand and share their own ideas, and the list of different ideas will be kept on the board for students to refer to when it comes time to make their own bar graph.
Step 3, data collection. So students will be separated into groups of 3 to 4 students per group. Each group will be asked to decide on a bar graph topic together. Then each individual student will receive a data collection chart. That's something that looks like this. Students are first told to collect data from students within their own group.
Students are then instructed to collect data from one other group. So this encourages moving around the classroom, which is great for students with attention deficit disorders such as ADHD. It just incorporates a little movement and social interaction as well. So for example, once Sally in group 1 collects data from all 3 of her group members and all 3 of her group members collect data from Sally, group 1 will then get up and collect data from group 2 and vice versa. So this gets them moving around the room as well as gets them collecting the data that they need in order to create their own bar graphs. Accommodations and adaptations for this data collection. Students with cognitive disabilities can be closely partnered with another group member when collecting data from other students. Students with physical disabilities who cannot move around the classroom to collect data from another group as easily as others could be positioned in a place close enough to another group to easily come to them. And lastly, students with assistive technology can record data using their device, or partners can be designated to take notes for them. So again, this is incorporating that social interaction and students teaching students during this data collection section. After the data is sufficiently collected, students will be returning to their individual seats with their completed data collection charts. Each student will receive a blank bar graph template. That's something that looks like this. I'll prompt the students to give their bar graph titles as well as labels for each axis, as this is crucial to any bar graph. Then, using crayons, students will independently graph their data. If necessary, students can refer to other group members for assistance, and I will be walking around the room to observe the students' work, and am there for help also if necessary. Though the bar graph topics were decided in groups, I thought that having each student create their own individual bar graph and having their own individualized end product would allow for them to prove their individual understanding, which would then allow for me to answer questions and meet with students as necessary. Accommodations and adaptations for the bar graph creation process. Students can be partnered up when working on the creation of their bar graphs to allow for students supporting students. Students unable to hold a pencil or write can complete the assignment with the use of an interactive whiteboard on which their finger could be used to write and complete the bar graph. Students who require additional time to complete assignments can be given appropriate time if necessary. As the students finish their bar graphs, they are invited to hang completed bar graphs on the board in front of the class. Students who finish early can assist students in working on their graphs. So this allows me as their teacher to gauge how much time each student is taking to make these bar graphs, as well as understand when the class comes to complete their bar graphs. Once all the graphs are displayed on the board, the class can reflect upon the completed work. Students are able to look at the different topics chosen for each bar graph, as well as ask any questions still remaining. I'll ask questions about the data collected from each graph, such as, what pet is the most popular in our class? According to this graph, how many people in our class like chocolate ice cream? What is the average number of siblings in our class? So this reflection gives an opportunity for students to practice their newly learned graph vocab, but also to learn fun facts about their class. This end reflection will also give me as their teacher an additional opportunity to observe understanding. So when I was walking around the room, watching students complete their bar graphs, I was able to answer questions and see where each student is at in understanding this topic, but also seeing the end result on the board and seeing questions answered and asked will give me a better idea of how my students are doing. Additional accommodations and adaptations. Because students will be allowed to work at their own pace, differentiation will occur based on students' questioning, needs, and time taken to complete the assignment. Those students who complete the task first will either help with other students or go on to another predetermined task. So again, this is that students teaching students and giving extra assistance as needed. Those students needing extra time will be allowed that, and those needing one-on-one instruction will have time set aside by the teacher for such accommodations. I will monitor for understanding based on activities completed before graphing the assignment. For example, data collection, the discussion of the graphing, or any pictorial representation of data. And lastly, feedback or supplemental help will be given as needed throughout the activities. So here I have just one example of what a completed bar graph might look like done by a student. This one is called Favorite Ice Cream Flavors of Miss Snyder's Class, and as you can see, the data collected was whether students like chocolate, vanilla, or strawberry ice cream. So just imagine, 18 or like 20 of these hanging up on the board of a classroom might look very colorful, as well as give students something to reflect on and look at the information provided. Thank you for watching my lesson on bar graphs. If you have any questions, please feel free to let me know.